Hello. Welcome back to the Scale Up Leader. This is today's webinar on the 5 mechanisms you need to win with OKRs. I'm going to just start out by introducing myself, but before I do, can you hear the audio okay? Last time I was doing this, I had terrible audio problems, and when I listened to the recording myself, even I couldn't understand what was going on. So if you are listening, can you just drop a comment or a like or something to say that yes, you can hear this audio, or no, you can't hear it and it sounds terrible, or it's got interference, or I don't know what, it's going up and down, or whatever it is like that, too quiet, anything like that. But I can hear myself, so I hope it's okay. So by way of introduction, I'm Richard Russell. I am originally Australian. I started my life as a software developer. I then came to London. I worked at Deutsche Bank in the sort of software space in DevOps before it was called DevOps. And then I came to Google, and I was at Google for 6 years, did a bit of business development, a bit of sales engineering, a bit of product management, a bit of people management, a bit of client services even. And I learned about OKRs there. And that's one of the things that I spent in my early time. Jenny's here, and Jenny says, yes, she can hear me. That's awesome. Thanks, Jenny. Right. I really appreciate that because I had a problem previously. So basically, that's my background. I was at Google for 6 years. I learned about OKRs there. Actually, I wasn't super impressed, but I learned a huge amount about managing, and I learned a lot about how OKRs fit into good management and how OKRs enable good management there. After Google, I had a couple of startups. I had my own, didn't work, didn't go anywhere. Joined another one, learned something there. It was interesting for a year. Then came to Luxembourg, where I was 2 years. It feels like 10 years, but I was 2 years at Amazon, where I ran a team of localization people, and I had about 100 people, including machine translation and software development and operations and so on. And we did the part of Amazon that enables you to translate all of the listings. So if you now go to amazon.de, you can get it in multiple languages. And that was my project. While I was there, one of the things that I learned over that 2 years is that I didn't want to be there. I was a square peg in a round hole. I learned a huge amount about management. I really enjoyed lots of aspects of that. But my big learning was that my energy comes from helping other people as opposed to being an executive myself. So I started this business, and now what I do, I work primarily with scale-ups. I'm going to bring the slide on screen just to show you what I do, and then we'll get into the content. I work primarily with scale-ups, usually seed to Series D, and I help them with the topics that we're talking about today. So all of this content is what I do with companies. Really, I do it. I can do a retrospective, execution audits, full rollouts of OKRs and management systems, or develop a custom solution. If you're interested in this, if you're in a company and you'd like some help with your management team, especially if it's the executive team or the senior management team, and you want to help do that topics of like focusing and aligning and getting things done faster, accelerating execution, engaging teams and that kind of thing, that's what I do. And I do it with OKRs. And you can book a call with me on meet.talktorichard.com, and we can chat about how we can work with your teams to improve how your business is running. If you're an individual leader, I'm also beginning, I haven't yet done this yet, this is the first time I'm announcing this, a project called Scale Up Leaders. And basically it's going to start out as a cohort course at the end in December. We're going to take about 20 people through all the content we're doing today, plus some depth in here and how to apply that to your existing situation. This will suit a product manager to executive level. So anyone who's in a leadership position, whether or not you have direct reports, and we'll have expert training, peer coaching, and we'll be building a community. If you're interested in this, drop me a message on LinkedIn, just to connect to me. We'll have a chat about it. Right, so that's the start of it. I'm going to just show these two slides again in the middle and at the end again, just in case you missed it. But in the meantime, let's get on with it. So what are OKRs? In order to talk about how to use OKRs, we first have to understand what are OKRs, like what the mechanisms are. We need to understand what they are first. So my simple explanation for what OKRs are, I think, by the way, a lot of content about OKRs is overly complicated. So my approach to OKRs basically is an OKR consists of objectives and key results. And there's a consistent time constraint across the organization. There's what we will achieve, that's the objective, and the definition of success, that's the key results. So that's what OKRs are, right? That's the basic idea of what OKRs are. Now, as an example of this, let's go through this example. We in Q4, so that's the time constraint, we will scale up our sales machine, right? That's the objective that we're going to do. That's the thing we're going to achieve. Now, you might notice that's a little bit undefined, but that's okay because we have key results as measured by increase average monthly webinar attendance from 10 to 100, increase initial meetings with qualified leads per month from 2 to 5, increase conversion rate of qualified lead to sale from 15 to 30%, and sign our first no-touch trial customer, which is kind of a milestone key result. Now, I'm not going to go into what are the rules of OKRs and so on. I think that's generally a bit overdone. So we're not going to go into that in detail, but this is an example OKR that should help you understand what's going on. What I do want to do is point out you can put this into an OKR format. So we will scale up our sales machine as measured by key results. And that's basically the format. So that's a simple way of looking at an OKR. And then if you think about this, the objective is really about setting direction and motivating action, right? So what we're doing here is communicating to everyone. If we're in you imagine the elevator pitch, hey, everyone, this is what we're doing. We're going to scale up our sales machine. We're going to do OKR2, all that sort of stuff, right? And then the key results are really about defining the setting direction and motivating action should be inspiring and memorable and informal. And the reason for that is because you want these objectives to come up in normal conversations at work. So when someone says, what are we really trying to do here? Like there's a debate about something, we can then say, well, what we're trying to do is scale up our sales machine. And then that reminds us what we're actually trying to achieve. And so the key results here are really about defining the problem to be solved, right? And think about it like this. This is an action of delegation. It's an action of engaging the team in solving specific problems. So these are the problems I want you to solve. And to do this well, they need to be unambiguous, right? So we need to know at the end of the quarter, we need to know without shadow of a doubt, we need to know, did we succeed or did we not? Or how much did we succeed in this? And it can't be ambiguous. Because if it's ambiguous at the end of the quarter, then clearly at the start of the quarter or during the quarter, you don't know what you're trying to achieve, right? So it has to be unambiguous and it has to be constraining and empowering. And I'm just going to show you what I mean by that. This is the micromanagement continuum. So think about things that you're doing, right? Exist on this continuum. Like whenever you're working with a team, whether you're an individual, whether you're a product manager or a senior manager or executive or CEO, on one end, if you're too constraining, if you go down to the constraining end, it's micromanagement. Too constraining is micromanagement, but you need to have some constraint. On the other end is empowering, but too empowering is vague vision peddling. And then that sort of thing like, we're going to build this thing and go away and do it. And no one quite knows what we're doing. And the sweet spot where you want your OKRs to lie on this continuum really varies by the team, the situation and leader. There's no one solution that fits all. If you have a very junior team, you need to be a bit more constraining. If you have a lot of ambiguity and difficulty with aligning teams, maybe you need to be a bit more constraining, right? If you have a very senior team, if you have a leader who's very, very capable of coaching, maybe you can be a bit more empowering and give a bit more freedom. But that continuum, there's no right answer for everybody. It depends on the situation and the team and the leader themselves. So you put these OKRs together into a set of OKRs, and there's your company OKRs, Q4 company OKRs, right? And I've numbered them to make it easy to refer to. And we put this whole thing into an OKR cycle. So we start and we end, and we have some sort of scoring at the end. And that in the middle, we have focused work. And part of the goal of this is to have some level, like while we're changing things, like as life goes on in our growth of our business, we're growing our business and all of that, and we're changing some things, but we only change it once a quarter. So we can mostly do focus work and actually achieve something without that every day the priorities change sort of thing, right? Now, one thing I want to make you think about is that OKRs, while they're really useful, they're just one management tool, right? So there's a lot of other management tools you have, and you have a sales funnel, you have incentive programs, you have metrics, you have Scrum, you have Kanban, project managing, personal goals, promotions, all these different tools. And whatever you're doing, you should try and use the right tool for the job. And as a specific example of that, if you're a sales team and you have an incentive program, most of your work is going to be defined by the incentive program, and having OKRs on top of that probably just confuses everybody, right? Because they're driven by the incentive, right? So you need to use the right tool for the job. Some of these tools exist for specific purposes. So you should use OKRs where it makes sense. To understand where they make sense, think of your business like a machine. So this is the machine of the business. It has a sales funnel that it takes in customers, a sales pipeline, it's a marketing funnel and a sales pipeline. And then there's this box here. And this box is the thing that does stuff. It's like your delivery part, your customer success, your actual product, your service. And out pops customers who are happier or more satisfied or have some needs met or they're improved in some way, right? So, and out pops profit. And your business is basically a machine that does this. You might have a couple of funnels like sellers and buyers. You might have some other complexity there, some partnerships and so on. But fundamentally, that's your business. That's what you're doing. and every business looks pretty similar. And what you're doing in your business as a leader is you're designing, building, and running the machine. That's the thing that you're doing, right? Clearly, you have to start the machine and fund the machine as well. But when we're talking about the work that you're doing here, it's really designing, building, or changing, and running that machine. And the point of the business is to run the machine, right? So um, if you had to stop everything except running, when you talk about operating profit is really when you're running the machine, how much money do you make by just turning the handle? So that's an operating business and it's running. And then as you're changing it, you're growing it, you're developing new features, you're implementing your strategy, you're designing things, you're basically creating a new strategy, you're creating new ideas, you're innovating and so on. So all this flow goes through, but the point is to run the machine. And OKRs are great at driving change. That's really where they fit in. So think about that diagram there. We're running the machine. You can use other tools for that. When you want to build and change the machine, when you want to change how things are operating, OKRs are a great tool for that. Designing it, strategy, innovation, and so on. There are some other tools for that generally. All right. So that's where OKRs fit in the organization. And there's an implication here, by the way. If you happen to have, you think about the org chart of an organization, there are different parts of the org chart where more or less change needs to happen. And you would use OKRs where you need to drive change, as opposed to don't use them just because you're a manager, use them because you need to drive change. And if your change is different to other changes that need to be driven. Now that's a bit complicated. We talk about that in with my clients, and it does make a lot of sense when you actually think through. But here's the thing. OKRs are great for change, but they don't do anything on their own. Right? They're setting this goal and setting the end of it. It may make people feel bad for not meeting it, but on its own, it doesn't do anything. You actually have to do something. And what you need is mechanisms. And I define a mechanism as a complete process for you to turn inputs into outputs. And what I mean by that is it's not just, and I use the word mechanism instead of process, because a process feels like a thing that happens to me. Like I go through a process and something is happening to me. A mechanism is a thing that I drive. Right, I am using the forklift to move things from here to there, but the forklift enables me to move them, right? So think of all of these things like things that I drive. And here's where we get to the core mechanisms. The 5 core mechanisms that I've discovered really make a difference. And I've discovered this through quite a lot of trial and error in this process, but also just through working in different contexts and seeing what works in different contexts and looking back at my own history and reading a lot of books. I have a lot of books. So I filtered this down to the 5 core mechanisms. And just briefly, they are the planning habit. So think about if you have a goal without a plan, it's just a dream. So by having the plan, you put a plan in place, you can actually turn that into action. The operational link, understanding what you're running is working and how what you're doing is changing what you're running. The execution cadence, making things happen on a week basis. The strategic link, making sure that you're actually doing what you're intending to be doing. And accountability. And that's basically finding a way to make sure that you're presenting what's happened and what didn't happen so that we can actually make sure that people feel the need to get results. And one thing to think about here, just by the way, is that when you're talking about the operational link, that's linking everything to the running. So we're doing the OKRs, we do care about what's running, but we need to have a way of linking back to, well, how is this machine actually running and how does that inform what I'm doing with my OKRs? The execution cadence is where you're doing the building and changing. And the strategic link is where you make sure you're connected to your design, right? So these all link together. Every business that is successful tends to have some variation of these core mechanisms. Like this is not new. This is not like suddenly, oh, we need to plan. Not everyone plans, but planning is well known. These are well known sort of ideas. And in fact, if you think about it, OKRs are not exactly rocket science. They're not exactly earth. They're basically good leadership, good management. Tell us what you want to do, and tell us what the success looks like. Define success or define the problem. And so in these cases, a lot of these things are things that a lot of companies do. But what really helps is to look back over what you're actually doing in terms in your company and see how these fit into these 5 mechanisms and then adapt those mechanisms, because once you understand what you're doing, it makes a difference. And just as a reminder, this is the middle of the presentation. I'm just going to show you what I do. I do work with scale-ups. So I work with scale-ups to do this. We do a retrospective and understand how this is working right now. A full audit, I go through working with the leadership team to understand what's working, what's not working, so we can select the right changes to make to set up this operating system in your business, a full rollout and all that sort of stuff, or a custom solution. If you're interested in that, please do drop me a message or let me just move that there. book a call on meet.talk to Richard, right? Especially if you're in this company state and you'd like some help with that with your organization. I'm happy to talk to anyone who's an influencer of the executive team or on the executive team. If you're an individual leader and you'd like to apply this stuff to your own environment, it's a bit different, but it still works really well. And I'm happy to announce that I'm doing a cohort course starting in December. There's expert training, peer coaching, and a community. It's going to be cool. Contact me on LinkedIn if you're interested in this, because I'm still setting up exactly how the pricing will work and exactly what's going to be in it. But basically, this is going to be a way of making sure that you're kicking off your Q1 really well. So let's go back to the 5 core mechanisms. And I see someone made a comment here. Pavlos says, love these 5 core mechanisms. So do I, Pavlos. And this is, I have to say that this concept, I think, is something that is relatively natural, but the way of thinking about it actually clarifies what you're doing and means that you can go through this. So if you take one thing from this presentation, take a copy of this slide, right? It's recorded and you can see this later on, but take a screenshot of this slide and just think about, what am I doing in my business? How am I doing in my leadership that links into these things? But what we're going to do right now is go into each one of these things in a little more detail. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail because that's really, it's a bit more in depth, but I'm going to try and give you an overview of each of these parts. Now, the planning habit to start off with. The idea with the planning habit is you take an objective or a key result and you give it an owner. So someone's got to own this objective or the key result, or some objectives and some key results. You can slice it however you want. And what they do is they create a 1-page plan. And creating the 1-page plan, I call it a 1-page plan because specifically I want it to be a perpetual straw man. It's not intended to be a blueprint for, not intended to be a blueprint for here's what we're going to do. It's not intended to be a hands-off management tool. It's here's what I'm thinking of, and I'll tell you in the next slide what's inside it. But after you do that, you review it with your colleagues, with your team, with your peers, with your management, and you revise it. But this is a habit. It's not just one thing you do once. You're constantly reviewing this and revising it based on how things are going. We'll see how this all fits together. Fits together. Pavlos says something you always have in mind, but I put this in a detailing scheme. That's the idea here. I'm trying to structure this so that people can understand what's going on. If you have any comments, by the way, or questions, please drop it in the comments and I'll try and address it at least towards the end, if not during the middle. So this is the planning habit. You're trying to do this and you've got a habit of planning. Make sure you keep your plan short and engage people with it, because the purpose of the plan is not to list out all of the things that I will do, but it's a basis for change and it's a basis for relating to, engaging with your team and drawing out the ideas that they have. Inside the plan, you have a plan and it has the OKRs you're trying to achieve, the initiatives you're planning to use to get there, which may or may not be all of your own team's initiatives. There may be other teams as well, and the resources you need, how you're using the resources in your team and the resources that you depend on, right? That's the simple part of the plan. Optionally, you may also want to add metrics, like how you're going to measure success, milestones, how you know how you're proceeding along the way, especially when it's ambiguous and you don't have a number, but you have like things you'll launch along the way. Risks, things that you want people to be aware of. Interestingly, you might want to have non-planned things that I'm not planning to do that you might be disappointed if I'm not doing them, but I want you to know I'm not doing them so that you're not expecting them. And run work. Now, what I mean by run work is like business as usual, the processes you have to do, because generally as a leader, you'll have a series of resources that you have available, and a lot of them might be busy running the machine, and you don't want to write that down. So I know I've got 20 people, 15 of them are busy running the machine and 5 of them are doing changes and running these initiatives, and we depend on product team to do things, whatever it is, you're writing that down. So that's what's in the plan. And once you have that in the plan, again, review and revise. Keep reviewing and revising. You help other people, your dependencies, your colleagues understand what's in there, what's going on. Gaurav says, hit us more when we know this. We know we never realized this. Yeah, it's funny. It's like some of this stuff is obvious when you say it, but it doesn't always come out super clear initially. So we've talked about the 1-page plan. We've got the planning habit, right? The operational link, number 2. The operational link is really about how you link what you're doing with your actual operations, with the running of the machine. So when you think about running the machine, you've got this machine here, and I've got my diagram that I spent some time on here. It creates profit, and it also creates data and feedback. And so what we're going to do is every week We're going to look at this data and feedback, have a meaningful conversation about it. And there's a technique to having this particular conversation, but have a conversation about this data and feedback. Try and understand it. What we're doing is we're trying to understand what are the inputs that are driving this? What's going on? How do we understand our business better? And we're going to create actions and shared insights. Now, sometimes people say, well, what has this got to do with OKRs? Because we're just running the machine here. And it's like, yes, cool. And some people say, well, we should have OKRs around this. I think that actually data and feedback is a better way of running most of this kind of repeated stuff that's unambiguous and doesn't change much. But what we do is by having this regular review of what's actually happening in our machine, right, our business, we can then use that to inform our planning habit. We're changing some of our plans based on what's actually happening in the ground, and we're getting these insights that are going to drive new OKRs and new insights into our strategy the next time around. So it's only by understanding what's happening in my machine, how my business is running, that I can really understand how to build things and what to design. And I can understand what successes I've had, right? Because your OKRs may have a couple of really important metrics in them, the key results, but it's quite likely that there's more data that matters to your business than just the 3 or 4 items in your key results, right? You may well have 20 or 30 different data points, and looking at them regularly and going, that's interesting. I've changed something about my business. I've changed the conversion rate. I've improved the conversion rate, but look at that. My return rate's gone up really high. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't think about that when I set my OKRs, but look at that. That's happening, and now I need to do something about it. And looking at this regularly helps you make sure that that's happened, that you're paying attention to it. Thirdly, and this is kind of the part that we talk about, often people in OKR land talk about as check-ins, the execution cadence. And this is where you make sure the building is happening. And what I wanted you to think about here is you probably are familiar with the Eisenhower matrix. And the Eisenhower matrix basically says you have urgent things and not urgent things, and you have important things and not important things. And things that are urgent and important are basically operational fires, and you've got to go run and firefight them. And generally, they get a lot of attention because they're urgent and important. But then there's urgent and not important things like interruptions and distractions and so on. Some of them can be urgent, like I need a response now, but they're actually not that important. Then there's not urgent and not important things, and these may be things like ideas, right? Sometimes there's a whole lot of things that can fit into this category, but there's stuff that distracts you from what you're really trying to achieve or whatever. And then there's the important and not urgent things, and that's where the OKRs really fit. It's really about the things that are not on their own urgent, but they're important. So what we're going to do with the execution cadence is on a regular basis bring attention from the not important to the important, from the not important and not urgent and urgent to the important and not urgent. And we're going to bring attention between the urgent and not urgent but important things. And what I mean by this is that sometimes you need to decide to let a fire burn so you can fix the root cause. And sometimes you need to stop your important work so you can put out a fire. And you have to make that decision consciously. But what we're doing on this execution cadence is every week we're meeting and we're creating action regularly. The act of running this meeting, of having some sort of weekly meeting, is all about generating momentum, right? Creating momentum. And that's the act of leadership. You're engaging people and amplifying their efforts towards the achievement of a goal. But you have to do that on a regular basis. It's not enough to just say, here's the goal, off you go, right? Every week we do this. So I've put together a kick-ass meeting agenda. And this really works. What I suggest you do, start out by having asynchronous updates. So instead of going around the circle, what have you worked on today? What have you worked on this week? What have you worked on this week? Or that kind of thing. And everyone does their update and everyone else is bored and distracted and not engaged. Just write them down and send them asynchronously. And you can coach people to send quite efficient ones, especially if you have a plan, that everyone's got a plan, and they can update in relation to the plan. They don't have to write everything. The second thing you do is you share wins. So this is at the start of the meeting. You actually go, hey, okay, what wins have we got this week? And some of them will be in the asynchronous updates. Some of them will be things people can remember. But you just get them to share the wins. And what you're doing there is you're amplifying that thing and creating reason to have momentum. Like we're celebrating momentum. And you're recording this so that you can, not recording with a recorder, but writing them down so that you can use these wins again later on in your own management meetings. You then do some learning capture. So what failures have we had and what do we learn from them and how do we take those learnings and distribute them around the company or distribute them where they need to go? How do we maximize the benefit from these learnings? You don't want to spend too long on these things, but you do want to do them because this is how you develop your people. Right? It's really about taking the momentum, increasing momentum, taking failure, turning the failure into successes, into learnings, and making sure things happen. So that's a great way of starting the meeting. And then the rest of the meeting is really where the action happens. And this is the operational link that I just talked about. You go through the data, see how things are operating right now. What do we need to learn from this? What do we need to change? What insights do we get from this? And then we look at our asynchronous updates and what's happened in the past, and we use our planning habit. We change our plans, right? We change what we are planning to do, so that we can make sure we're doing the right things going forwards. We're adapting what we're doing, right? And part of the idea of OKRs is that the OKR stays still. The plan, that's your set of initiatives, the things you're working on, change as you learn things. And that basically is the execution cadence, that core area there. The other stuff's just useful to make the meeting kick ass. This is the execution cadence. It's making this happen on a regular basis. One of the things I will say about these meetings is don't do all the work in the meeting, right? So have a timed agenda, keep it short, and whenever there's a problem, a big one that comes up that requires some input from someone or some thinking or some debate, if you can't resolve it in that allocated 5 minutes or whatever it is, set up another meeting. Part of your goal of this kind of having this execution cadence is that by having this meeting regularly, we can trigger off other work. We can start other work to happen. Not all of it has to happen in this meeting. And some people ask me, where are the OKRs, Richard? We're doing OKRs, aren't we? Shouldn't we go through our OKRs in this meeting? And I think no. I think that the OKRs are basically the North Star. So you treat your OKRs as North Stars, not agenda items. If you start from the OKRs, what you do is you look at the OKR, look at what you're trying to achieve. The next step is planning, but you've done the planning. You have a plan. So what you're actually doing here is reviewing your plans, reviewing what's happened, and making decisions using the OKRs as North Stars. And what this looks like is basically this. You take in your asynchronous updates, your weekly business review, which is your operational link. That's your data. You have a good discussion about that. You generate some shared insights. You have a good discussion about that based on your OKRs as your North Stars, and that generates some decisions. And then you have some discussion about how do we take action on this. These actions are the changes to your plans. So this all links together, right? These are not sort of entirely independent mechanisms. Fourth one, sorry. So that's the execution cadence, and that's in some ways a very, very important core part of it. We'll put all this together at the end. The fourth part is the strategic link. And the strategic link, basically, if you think about a lot of this work, you're going through the quarter, you're doing the work, it's like a whirlwind. You've got this constant execution. You're running the machine, you're building the machine, you're doing the work. Halfway through, just stop for a second, or not for a second, but have a meeting, and check the link between what you're doing and your actual strategy, right? And you want to ask two fundamental questions, and there's some detail here. Are we doing things right? So you go up to the flight level, you're above the whirlwind. You say, are we on track? Do we need to change? Are our OKRs valid? And what you're doing here is you're just taking a step back and you're saying, do we have the right priorities? Do we have the right initiatives? Do we have the right resources? Are our current OKRs correct? And you make some decisions based on this. And this is basically that mid-level of like, are we doing the things that we're doing, are we doing them right? Are we going where we want to go? Do we still want to go there? Then you have a step up to the satellite level. Don't know whether the satellite's the right word, but the next level up higher, right? Into the space level. And you're looking down at the higher level, right? Are we doing the right things? Is our strategy correct? What's next? And what this is really doing is helping you understand, based on the work that you're doing, your constant review of the operations of the machine, your progress in your building the machine, you're executing your strategy, and what you're learning and the insights you're generating, you can go, okay, hang on a minute. Is our strategy right? Are we going the right way? And based on that, what sort of OKRs do we need next quarter? Now, realistically, this kind of thing is not going to happen in one session. You probably have to have a bit more of a think about some of these things. So you trigger off further meetings on this. But sometimes, in this case here, you trigger off, we're going in the right direction, we're going to keep doing it, we'll just set up the OKR setting meetings. And sometimes you say, looks like our strategy is not really quite right. We need to have some discussion about this, some research, we need to do some work to figure out what our strategy should be. And that's a great thing because it enables you to make sure you're going in the right direction. The final and fifth thing, and by the way, if you've got a question, feel free to drop it in the comments. I will get to it. If you've got any comments or questions, I'd love to hear it. The final area is accountability, right? And accountability is basically this simple way of thinking about it is at the end of the quarter, here are the OKRs that we said we do, and here's how we did. And there's a lot of debate about how to score OKRs. my view is keep it as simple as you can. Often enough, there's a metric in the OKR, share the metric, right? We wanted to increase a conversion rate from 2% to 3%. We achieved 2.85%. That's enough. Everyone can understand what that means. If you try and convert this into a score or something like that, then it gets too complicated. Sometimes you can have traffic lights, like this red, yellow, green sort of idea. I think that can help, particularly in a check-in situation or at the end of the year, just to highlight it and see where people see what's going on. If you do make it into some sort of percentage, every now and again, someone will go, what we're going to do is have percentages, and then we're going to weight the percentages, and then we're going to multiply them all together, and then have a weighted score overall, right? And it just becomes complicated for no benefit. So recommend not doing that. Just have this as simple as possible. But what's going on is it's not just that you're scoring them. You're not just getting the results. You're doing this in front of your organization, right? You're not doing the work. You're presenting this in front of your organization, in front of your team. By doing so, you create accountability. So people get to say, well, look, here's what we said we'd do, and here's what we did, right? Now, obviously, at this point, the next step is, well, what's next? So what you do is you link this together in an all hands, and you're linking your accountability of what you did and what you're about to do, what you're going to do next. You're announcing your next OKRs. But there's a little bit more to it. And I have a kick-ass all-hands agenda that I think really helps. The first part is all about accountability. And what you're doing is you're showing your OKRs, just the results of the OKRs at the start, how we did our building and changing work. And then you want to talk about what that means for how the machine is running, right? This is the point of the business. So we want to talk about how our machine is running. We want to talk about some data and some anecdotes of what this means for our customers to make it real for people. But this is basically backwards looking. And by doing this, we get to see, well, what's actually happened. What did we do, right? But then as part of this, we can also share our wins, and we've collected them through the quarter, remember? And we can share some of the learning capture that we have. Like, we failed in this OKR. We got a red. We thought we would get from 2% to 4% of conversion rate. We only got to 2.1%. It's red. It's not good. But our learning is this. And that learning is really powerful, because that means that people don't have to be afraid to fail. They can do things, and the learning is highly valuable, and they benefit from that learning. The second part is strategy. And you basically say, well, so we've talked about what we did. Here's a reminder of what our machine really is and what we're here for, and our vision and all that sort of stuff. And here's a bit about how the context that we're operating in is changing. So therefore, here's our design and here's our strategy going forwards, right? Some of this is about the changes that you have. Some of this is just educating the team. You've got a growing team. Not everyone knows everything. This is going to help them get on board and understand what you're actually trying to do and put their work into context. The third part is the future. And the third part is basically, here are the OKRs we're going to try and achieve this quarter at the company level or at the group level. And maybe you go into some of the plans, like here are where the plans are, what this means for me. And what you're looking for now is some responses, like, are there questions? And the purpose of this meeting, purpose of this all hands is really not to just have a retrospective and look back at what we did and all that sort of stuff, but to create action going forward. So the purpose of the all hands is actually to generate that response and to see, are people actually engaged in this, and what do I need to do to make sure they are engaged going forwards? So that's the Kick-Ass all hands agenda. Putting all of this together, because it's a bit complicated. I think it's simple in some ways, but there's also lots going on here. So putting it all together, remember your planning habit, operational link, execution cadence, strategic link, and accountability. When you put it together, it looks like this. There's your OKR cycle. We're going to kick off with some planning and do some reviews of the plans right at the very start before we even announce the OKRs. Then every week, we're going to have a execution cadence meeting, right? In that execution cadence meeting, we're going to do the operational link, make sure that we understand our business and what's happening, right? Look at the data and the feedback. And we're going to iterate on our plan. We're going to do some of the planning habit. We're going to start changing our plan. So that's all like our weekly meeting, right? And you can use the Kick-Ass weekly meeting agenda. You do that every week. In this case here, I've only got 6 weeks. Normally you'd have 12 or 13. Halfway through, we stop and we do a strategy check-in. We say, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing things right? And then are we doing the right things? And that helps you make sure that we're going in the right direction. And then at the end, you do the accountability, which is basically the Kick-Ass all hands, right? Now, you can, if you want, and I recommend, add a retrospective in here so that you can look at, overall, are we doing things right? And what do we need to adapt? And what I've found is that no organization just wants to imitate another organization. It doesn't work. You have a different culture, different problems, different everything else. So it's worth making sure that you're retrospective. You look at what you're doing and does this actually work for us, or do we need to do something different here, right? That's really about the process as opposed to the content, because all these mechanisms will help you make sure you're doing all of the right things. This is like, are we doing them in the right way, right? Okay. Whoops. Did I just go that again? I did. Right. Right. So that's basically the end of the presentation of the content there. As a reminder, if you're interested in what I do, if you're interested in working with me, there are two main ways of working with me. If you're working for a company and you want some help with your company, I work with seed to Series D normally, sometimes private, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, but usually seed to Series D scale-ups. We can do a retrospective, an execution audit, the full rollout, all the stuff we talked about here, plus more, basically stuff that's going to help your leadership team get the business functioning really, really well, right? This what we do. I've worked with a couple of startups. Some of them have been, as I say, seed to Series D. So I've got 3 startups at the moment. They're all VC funded. They range from about 50 people up to, I think, 450 at the moment is the scale of the people I'm working with right now. And I'm working with the executive teams to figure out how to improve what they're doing. We look at what are the pain points they actually have, right? What's really going on and what's the motivation to change, and we select pieces from here about ways to change and adapt what they're doing to make this operating system work for them. It's not a cookie cutter approach. I've got a framework, but it's not a cookie cutter. So if you're interested in this, book a call on Meet.Talk to Richard. I'm happy if you're an executive, you're a C team, you're a CEO, you're a founder, have a chat. If you're not, but you think this is useful for your team, book a chat anyway. Let's have a chat and see if we can find a way to help your organization. Sometimes we can find ways to work through an organization. The second way that I do things is really for leaders. For product manager to executive, I'm kicking off a cohort course in December. There'll be expert training, all this stuff. It's going to be self-paced, but we're also going to have live sessions as well, and peer coaching. Now, peer coaching, I didn't mention this before, but peer coaching is super valuable for any leader, because what you're doing in this context here, when you have a wider variety of people, is you're getting people with different experiences and different contexts, so different things that they know, and you're sharing the problems. And so your ability to pattern match and to understand a broader perspective of problems and see and recognize and find solutions for a broader perspective of problems is going to grow dramatically. So peer coaching is really, really valuable. And we're going to set up a community as part of that. So if you're interested in that, contact me on LinkedIn. We're going to be a way of doing this for individuals if you're paying yourself. We're also going to make it really easy for companies to pay for their teams. So whether that's an individual or a group, like a group of leaders. But if you're interested in that, contact me on LinkedIn. We can have a chat about how that can work. Okay, if there are questions, please feel free to drop it in the comments. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you have right now. Otherwise, feel free to contact me anytime you want to have a chat about any of this. I can see a comment here from Jeremy. Thanks, Richard. Very insightful. Thanks very much, Jeremy. Really appreciate it. Really nice to hear that the feedback. It's really funny, by the way, doing these webinars. The way this particular webinar works on LinkedIn, I have no idea who's watching, or even if anyone's watching. The number at the top of my screen says 0, but I know, because I've done this a few times, that there are more than 0 people watching. In fact, there's probably about 15 to 20. So I have a question here from Jenny. What are your thoughts on using OKRs to refine prioritization, teamwork, and are focused on staying aligned to business needs rather than what people want to do for their own careers, particularly when people are often particularly when folks are often predominantly working from home? Given that you can read this on screen, I'm not sure it's benefit me reading it out. Okay, my thoughts on using your OKRs to refine prioritization and teamwork and staying aligned to business needs. So I think that especially when people are working from home, you kind of need to be even more disciplined around how you communicate the things that are really important and how you're making sure about transparency. So setting up this kind of set of mechanisms, this operating system, will help to make sure that this works. Otherwise, a lot of things can become ad hoc. When you have these mechanisms and you're conscious about them, right, you get sort of like, we have this conscious sort of like, we are doing something here. We're trying to understand how this relates to our operations and why the operations are valuable. And we're trying to understand how is this are we actually implementing our strategy? Do we need to change it? We're trying to make sure that we're always engaging everyone in their execution plan, right? We've got their plan and so on. People can see this in a written form with the plan. It's super valuable for working from home. So yes, I think it's massively valuable for working from home. Related to what people want to do for their own careers and keeping people aligned to business needs, I think this is a really interesting one. So in the ideal world, what you need for your career and what you're trying to do in your work should be aligned. And as a good manager, one of your jobs is to, a leader, the job is to engage people and help them understand how what they're doing helps the business, helps the customers, and helps you in your career. And that's a really key part of any manager's job, is to help people link the work that they're doing to the success in their career. Now, OKRs relate to this really well, because what we're doing in an OKR, we're saying, if you remember from the very start, I said the OKR is basically we're defining what we want to achieve and what we want to achieve and the definition of success, right? So we've got some measures and things we're doing there. Now, as we are working with our teams, we can then say, okay, in order to link this to your career, what you need in your career is things that you have done, things that you have done that you've been successful at, that created value for your business, for your customer, for your employer, that matter, which are the OKRs, right? So when I have these OKRs, what I really want to do as an individual contributor is take the things that I did that delivered things that matter for those OKRs, whatever that is, or whatever layer that is, right? How far back it is, if I took a whole one or a piece of one, and I put that into my CV and I say, I've now got a way of expressing the value that I create, not just the work that I do, but the value I create in my CV. So the link here is really clear, as long as my career is aligned. But aligning a career is really the job of the manager and the individual, to make sure that they've got the right people in the right places and so on. There's quite a lot in this question, but I think I've covered that. If I haven't, Jenny, just drop me a line or add something to it. Jenny's got another question here. Secondly, in a more traditional environment, is it necessary for all the constant check-ins? We have 6 monthly OKRs and quarterly check-ins. OKRs don't tend to change much within those time spans. Great question, Jenny. And I think that I tend to prefer a quarterly cycle, because I think, number one, things do change reasonably frequently. Like if we have a pandemic, we have a economic crisis or whatever it is, things change. So I think things do change reasonably fast. But I have seen organizations being very successful with annual OKRs, 6 monthly ones, 4 monthly ones, cycles that are offset from the calendar quarter to match up with financial quarters or with academic quarters or whatever you're doing. I have one customer who has 3 months of OKR work and then a 1 month gap 3 times a year. So they have a 4 month cycle with 3 months of work and then a gap. And the gap's where they put all their holidays and stuff like that, because they're French. So they have a lot of holidays. But basically, so I think you can do it with 6 months. You can do whatever works. I err on the side of doing it slightly more than you think is wanted, because then it gives you more opportunity to course correct. And whether you're course correcting on how I'm running my OKRs, or on what I'm trying to achieve, or on how I'm actually trying to achieve it, it's still a useful thing to have this a little bit more frequently. But if you have it 6 monthly, fine. If you have it annually, it's fine. I have clients who do it annually. When you have quarterly check-ins, again, I think with the check-ins, let's think about the check-in in terms of two things. One is that operational link, and one is the execution cadence. Depends what you're doing as to how frequently you need to be doing each of these things. I know some businesses you need to have an operational link every day, right? Specifically, if you're in a trading business, you might want a trading update every day, and it's okay to do that. Like, do it the way it works for your business. And if you don't have much changing, fine, do it less frequently. But I would say that generally, especially with the operational link, it's really helpful to look at the data a little bit more frequently than you think you need to, because by doing so, you gain familiarity with it. And once you gain familiarity with it, you start to grow a common understanding across the board of what's changing and why, and where are the things we don't know, and what are the inputs for the outputs, like what are the things we can control, and how do we understand this, and what segmentation should we do on this data, and how should we cut this out, and how should we do a study to figure out what the real drivers really are, right? When you're looking at their plans, again, it depends how often your plans and so on change. Having a check-in and saying, okay, are we doing the right things? Should we change anything about our plans on a regular basis? Sometimes the answer is no, we shouldn't change anything, and that's okay too. The thing where it gets painful, I find, is when people spend their time doing an update in the meeting, and we all go around a circle and do an update. Boring, waste of time, don't do it at all. Just do asynchronous updates. And then the second thing I find it's a waste of time is when the agenda is instead of people-based, it's going through the OKRs. Like, here's the objective. What are we doing here? And it's like, well, haven't you read the plan? Like, do you do you not know what we're doing? We've got a plan. Have a look at the plan. That's what we're doing. So everyone needs to have that context to have a really productive meeting. I mean, the value of the meeting and that engagement is, are we having a high value conversation? And that might be 15 minutes of like, okay, this has happened and that's happened. We're going to change our plan like that. What do you all think? And that we all have context. So now we can have a high value conversation about that. And it can be very fast, not a waste of time. So I don't know, you can do it more frequently or less frequently. Do it. I just generally recommend doing it a little bit more frequently than you think you want to, because then you can skip one and it doesn't hurt as well. Right. Thomas says, thanks for your video. No worries. You're welcome. I hope it's been valuable for you. Thanks for your comments and so on. And Thomas says, great, Richard. Thank you. Jenny says, how do OKRs pertain to performance reviews? Should they be separate? Again, awesome question, Jenny. You can ask more questions. I like you. I've liked you for years. We worked together at Google. It's what, 12 years ago now or more. Anyway, how do OKRs pertain to performance reviews? Should they be separate? I think they really should be. But however, they're linked. And the link is, I've kind of referred to it earlier on in the previous question, in the first question, which is that the link is really about the OKRs help define the definition of value, right? But think about this in terms of like what impact if you like, some people like to have OKRs and set them individually. I don't like to set individual OKRs personally, but we set individual OKRs and then we use the score of the OKR to define the performance of the person. So you said you were going to do this, you did 2/3 of that, therefore you get 2/3 score or whatever it is you want to do. So you can automate a lot of this. And it's really appealing because it feels like we're going objective. We're going, well, we have an objective measure of performance and there's no judgment in it. There's no subjectivity. So go ahead. But actually what's really gone on here for any kind of work that's ambiguous in any way, shape or form, which is basically everything outside of sales and operations, almost all this work is ambiguous. You're basically taking all of the ambiguity that exists and putting it at the start of the quarter when you don't have any context and you don't know what's going on. So instead of that, what's better to do is to embrace the ambiguity, embrace the fact that it's subjective. And you realize, it's really, really hard for me to judge how well an individual product manager, engineer, marketer is performing. But what I need to do as a manager is be engaged and involved in this. Have a good and clear way of expressing what I expect from someone at this level in sort of abstract terms. So I can say, here's my leveling system. This is where if you're talking to a HR consultant, leveling systems are super valuable. Like a senior software developer should be able to develop systems of this scale and have impact on system-wide issues, right? And engage in architectural discussions, that kind of thing, right? So then you can say, okay, well, this is what I expect from someone at this level, and this is how you performed. The OKR relates to this because it's like, well, this is the value you're creating and how valuable is it and how do I understand the value? But the distance, like the projection, isn't really the point. So you're not sort of trying to predict at the start of the quarter where you'll get to and then measuring based on that. You're just using it as a way of saying, well, this is what we mean by value. Now we understand what we mean by value. How did you perform according to what I expect from someone on that level? So I hope that helps a bit, Jenny. I think there's quite a lot of detail here in terms of how you can deal with performance reviews. I think there's also one aspect we haven't covered in this whole session, which is really about, do you use OKRs individually or not? And I think if you think about these using OKRs to drive change, I prefer to use OKRs when I need to initiate a change. I need to make something happen. Many parts of leadership may well work really well, like running a sales team. Most of that works well, the sales funnel and sales incentives. And that's mostly what I want to do with my sales team. I don't necessarily need to change a lot all the time. Maybe I do, but maybe I don't. Operations teams, metrics. It's great. That works. Measure the people with metrics, and mostly people will spend their time on that, and that's fine. So just because you're a manager doesn't mean you need to have OKRs. Use the OKR to get the result, and the result is change. And if what you're trying to achieve is change to how the business works, then that's a great tool. If not, then it's not such a great tool. Then you should use other tools. A lot of this is there's some judgment and some sort of like context involved. But again, that's what I do. Happy to work with people on trying to figure out how this works in specific situations, because I don't think there's necessarily strict rules that work. All right. And Jenny says, thanks, Richard. You're welcome, Jenny. I'm glad you found this valuable. Um, if anyone else is interested, if you're interested in working with me, book a call on meet.talktorichard.com or message me on LinkedIn. I'm really happy to hear from you. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you found this valuable and interesting. If you did, drop a like, drop a comment. Even if you're watching the replay, drop a like and a comment, whatever it is you want to do, share it with your colleagues. I'd be really pleased if you do so. It helps me understand that this is valuable, and then I can keep doing it. I do plan to do similar ones again in the future, where we'll dive into some of these topics in a bit more detail. But in the meantime, thanks very much for your time. Have a great week and scale well.